The next area, which always comes back and which is really a tough nut to crack, is identity. And this comes back to that point which I made at the beginning, right? No one knows whether I'm a dog or a person when I'm. And in most cases, you don't actually need to know. But when you do want to know, blockchain enables something that we actually call self-sovereign identity, which is a great way of actually moving that power in the digital society back towards the data subject, for instance, a citizen. Because it's a way of organizing digital identity whereby a person or organization or a machine can prove a claim about itself based on a verifiable credential. For instance, the Dutch Blockchain Coalition, we have done a pilot around vaccinations. If you have been vaccinated, you get a QR code that is digitally signed, and the issuance of that QR code is logged on a blockchain. When I present myself to a checkpoint, they scan the QR code, which checks the digital signature and the validity of the credential. The information the checker gets is only that the what is on the QR code, and it says this person is vaccinated. So they know that the QR code is valid because that's checked against a blockchain. This was a valid transaction, and it was issued by a valid party. And this goes for many more cases, diplomas, and you can think of any credential. We're working now also with banks to look at KYC processes, which is obviously highly interesting. If one bank has done a KYC process, couldn't they issue a credential where it says this person has KYC by us? There's no detail in there about the KYC, but just a green, let's say, check mark. And with that green check mark, you can go to another bank. That's not possible right now, also because of regulation, but also because it's still very difficult to establish.
So were these really only theoretical use cases for identity, or is there already a blockchain-based scanner for QR codes for instance, the vaccinations already in place? Do you know that?
Yes. Specifically for vaccinations, blockchain is not used. It makes use of the QR codes. And it checks then, so if you go on holiday this summer in Europe, it checks against a centralized database. So there's one problem with that. That is, every time when you present yourself somewhere with your QR code, and that is checked, that the holder of the central database could see through the that you have been checked, so they could see wherever you are. So from a privacy perspective, that's actually not ideal, and that could be that could actually be mitigated if you do that through a blockchain. But there is one thing that vaccinations don't really need, and that other cases do need, where blockchain really is needed, and that is if you revoke something. So let's say you have been granted a passport or that green check mark on your KYC. If then that credential is revoked, you could actually see that, because that revocation would be another transaction related to that specific identity on a blockchain. So if the checker, the verifier, then checks your credential, they would see, this is no longer valid. So they can actually say, well, we don't accept this specific identification. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, I'm interested in whether there are real world applications for blockchain. Like these, because these are really well, you can see them on the news, right? And if there is blockchain underneath, that would be really cool.
Yeah. So the Rabobank just launched Data Keeper. So if you go to datakeeper.nl, I believe, they created a digital wallet which can store your personal data and your personal credentials. This makes use of the principles of SSI and blockchain. So that is definitely a solution that is live and has really just been launched last week. In the Ministry of Interior, Ministerie van Binnenlandse Zaken, they are working on a blockchain-based base identity as well. And they're doing that actually on a European scale or in cooperation with other countries in Europe. And there's also going to be a European blockchain service infrastructure. So we have a European, let's say, blockchain that's being built.
Okay, cool.
The next area is mobility. And I think this is an interesting one where you can see this machine-to-machine economy actually come to life. There's an example of a company out there. It's a German company. They have created a wallet which you can actually install in a car, and that wallet has an identity, so it gives an identity to that car. And it's a wallet that can make use of a currency, cryptocurrency, and it uses blockchain. Is if you go and recharge your electric vehicle, or you go for gas at a station, or parking, or toll roads, then the car can automatically pay in a machine-to-machine transaction for its gas, for its toll, for its parking, without the driver really needing to do anything. So that's a true machine-to-machine transaction. And the role of blockchain in this is that it validates the transaction without the need for a third party. And that really lowers the cost for microtransactions. But it also enables scalability across many use cases of using that wallet, because otherwise you would have to make bilateral agreements every time you want to use that kind of system somewhere. So that is something that is currently in a pilot phase. But that I'm pretty sure that we're going to see in production in the next 2 years. Out of the Dutch Blockchain Coalition, we are working together with the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water State to actually work on a similar use case in mobility around mobility as a service. So how can you make sure that people, when they go through transportation modes, that they use transportation modes that are most logical for them from a time perspective, but also that are more logical, let's say, from a CO2 perspective. It depends really on what you want to achieve. So that's something that we're actually working on.
I have another question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be correct to say that blockchain is a typical platform model? It only works if multiple organizations or companies adopt? And if so, should it not be mostly in governmental discipline to take hold?
That's an interesting question. So yes, it's a platform in the sense that it has a network effect, right? So the more people that use it, the more value it has, right? So I think that is a correct remark. It's different from the platforms that we know, like Uber and Airbnb or any other. From the perspective that there you have one owner that says, okay, whatever happens to that platform, that's this, right? So, and once they have established a monopoly, you can make sure that the price goes up, etc. So blockchains are much more governed by, let's say, democratic principles. And that maybe ties into the second part of that question, that yes, it would make sense if government is part of certain blockchains. So for instance, I could imagine that a mobility blockchain would be part of the infrastructure as it is foreseen, right? So it is just like roads, it's an infrastructure that could be built by government. And I know that is very controversial when I say that, at least in blockchain land, because most people started out with blockchain or with Bitcoin because they said we don't want institutions to be involved. But at the same time, the reality is that we have institutions, and we are lucky to live in a country where at least we can trust the institutions that we have to a certain degree. So why not let them work with verifiable infrastructure? And that is what they are actually also doing.
Thank you. A second question is, what is the future outlook of blockchain as El Salvador made Bitcoin a legal tender? Is it a bold step?
I think that is quite a PR stunt from the president of El Salvador. What I find really funny is that, especially in the Bitcoin community, there are many people who you would call anarchists, right? So away with government, away with institutions. But now they are very much cheering that the president of a country says, well, now Bitcoin is a legal tender in my country. So let's see how that plays out. What is clear, though, is that creating a cryptocurrency or a digital equivalent of a fiat currency is something that is very high on the agenda. So I think that 85% of all central banks in the world are actually considering or building what is called a central bank digital currency, so a digital euro, which works in principle in the same way as a Bitcoin. But let's be careful what we wish for, because with such an issued currency, a central bank and as a government could see basically every transaction that we make. So they either have to build in very good obfuscation methods that we have. So there are things called zero knowledge proofs, etc. But in principle, they could see every transaction that we make. And actually, already 3 or 4 years ago, I was requested by the government of a country which I shall not name, but not in Europe, to work with them on such a currency, with the very specific aim to have that as benefit, right? So if people get benefit, that they would get this digital currency, so that the government could see that they do not spend it on the wrong things, like alcohol or what have you. I think that's a slippery slope that we have to be very careful of going into. But it's very clear that governments all around the world are looking at this.
Okay, thank you. No questions so far.
Okay, then the last example that I wanted to give is from energy. And I know this quite well because I worked on a couple of cases here. And it's interesting because the energy system is actually, and that's why I chose this picture, is actually decentralizing itself, right? So if we talk about decentralized technology being applicable, then energy would be great. Energy used to come from, let's say, the big central places, and then the electrons would be sent down through the grid to, let's say, a household or a company or what have you, or a factory. With the emergence of renewable energies like solar, wind, but also storage like batteries, the grid edge becomes much more important for the total supply of energy in any country. And actually, one of the ideas behind the Energy Web Foundation, where I worked, is that we can accelerate the adoption of these grid edge devices by enabling them to become part of the energy system in a quicker way. And for that, we really need a decentralized kind of operating system, so that we can give a battery, for example, an identity plus some logic, where the battery could actually trade surplus energy that it has directly with the energy market without the interference of any central party that it has to go through, because that would be all costs, etc., that would add up, and then it wouldn't make sense. So now it makes economically sense to actually start doing that. And on a household level, this will be very small, right? So you will make a few euros a month. But if we add up all the households in a country, then it really makes sense. It becomes bigger. So we can optimize this whole energy system in a better way by making use of this decentralized energy resources, but also at a certain point, making sure that we optimize the energy between usage, right? So which device in your house uses energy at what point, etc., now that's all very much a black box to the energy grid, but we can open up that black box by actually creating these kind of systems and making it viable to have on a very granular level appliances and devices connected to the grid. That was my last example, which opens up, I guess, the floor for questions.
Yeah, great. Well, this also opens up the possibility of blockchain to compensate for the energy usage of Bitcoin. A question I have for cryptocurrency and well, blockchain in general, it's almost religion-like. People believe in it or they don't, and if people believe in it, then there's no argument that takes hold on them. The question is, do you think that helps or prevents large-scale deployment of blockchain technology?
Well, it definitely does not help, right? So I think that the discussions going on, especially in the crypto community, do not help the acceptance in mainstream. So that's definitely one. The second is that, as with any new technology, what you see is that in first instance you get the real enthusiasts on board, right? So and I consider myself also a real enthusiast to this technology. Within these enthusiasts, there is often this like, oh, now we have this technology and we're going to apply it everywhere, right? And that's also what you see with the famous Gartner hype cycle, right? So there's a lot of buildup of enthusiasm. Then it comes to a hype at the height of the hype, and then people get disillusioned, and then we go to this throw of disillusionment to ultimately reach the plateau of something. I think of productivity. Yes, thank you. So I think that we needed to go through these phases, and where we are now is we are in this more towards this throw of disillusionment. But it also changes, let's say, the way that we talk about blockchain. And to use another model of technology adoption, this bell curve, you know, where you first have the first movers, etc. We are about to cross that chasm between the early adopters and mainstream. And what is needed for that are actually the things that are coming now. That is standardization, better tools, and a better understanding of what blockchain can actually do. So a lot of the use cases that have been developed in the past 5 years, I say, especially within companies, have been interesting, but completely useless. And the real value of blockchain is going to come to life now a more strategic conversation, and now that we lift up the topic to another level of conversation. I in the meantime see the questions coming in.
We still got a few minutes left, but we should take aware of the time. We can also pick just one question and then leave the other questions to be answered on the island.
Mm-hmm.
Choose one.
So I like the question about the colonial oil pipeline. So the bitcoins that were paid by the colonial oil pipeline indeed were tracked down. Why? Because the hackers were quite stupid, or the how do you call it? The criminals. What they did is they kept the bitcoins on an exchange, and an exchange is a centralized point where you can actually track it down. So the on and offboarding points of Bitcoin are not safe. You can always track down bitcoins there, but the Bitcoin blockchain itself has never been hacked. So in the 11 years of its existence, so it's always the on and offboarding points. And these guys were so stupid to leave it on one of the exchanges, and that is how they tracked them down and how they got hold of the bitcoins.
Cool little fact. All right. Let's leave the other questions to be answered on the island. I would ask you to join the forest island, Arno will be there to answer any of your questions. It's in the Meebo environment. It's different than this Hopin platform. You can find the link if you click on the reception on the up left. Armitage also posted the link in the chat. If you go there, you can join the Meebo environment, and then Arno and I will also join, and you can ask Arno any questions if you still have them, or just talk to anyone else that's on the island. So have fun, and thank you for joining.
See you there.